modern submarine canyons, there are large boulders going in sandy matrix. These are sandy Turbidites. But it was published in '66. People in the oil companies particularly didn't pay attention to this oceanographic documentation on marine geology because they thought it's some kind of oddball photograph. But in fact, this documents modern sandy debris flows. To show you how a turbidity current looked like, this is the turbidity current flowing towards you, and this fits exactly what Bagnall said in the beginning. It's Newtonian, turbulent, and is less than 9% by volume. When you put more sand into it, the whole thing collapses. It doesn't exist. That means coarse, sandy turbidity currents and conglomeratic turbidity currents, they don't exist. So when this thing deposits, they form a nice normal grading. That's what we call turbidite. So there are turbidites, and they do exist. This is how they look like, and I explained to you the physics of turbidity currents. Now let's go to the history of the turbidite research. The whole deep sea exploration started in 1872 when the British Royal Navy launched HMS Challenger in 1872. When they were sailing over Guam area, they stumbled upon one of the deepest area on the Earth's crust. It was 11 kilometers deep, and they called it Challenger Deep. At that time, they didn't know anything about plate tectonics. Later, the plate tectonics came into play. They named this area as the Mariana Trench. Some of the people I want to acknowledge in the turbidite research. One is Arnold Balmer. He introduced the Balmer sequence. This is nothing but this 5 division, A, B, C, D, E. And what he said was, if you see this A division, that means you are in the proximal part of a large fan. If you see C division, you are in the middle. If you see the very fine grained E division, you are in the outer fan. So people like this because it's easy to remember. Students like it because if there is a question on Balmer sequence, you put this, you get 10 points. And turbidite, they are predictable according to this diagram. The other two people are Bill Normer and Emiliano Muti. Bill Normer is the one who published the modern fan model. Muti was the one who published the ancient fan model, inner fan, middle fan, outer fan, and so on. This is all happening in the 1970s. At that time, everything was a turbidite. Probably the first major compilation of deep sea sedimentation was published in this book called The Geology of Continental Margins. It was edited by Crichton Burke and Charles Drake. Who is Crichton Burke? He used to work for Mobil. And there are 2 other people, Benz and Drummond. They all worked for Mobil, and they contributed 4 chapters in this volume. There is one a paper by Peter Vail. At that time, he was not popular, but he will become popular just in 3 years. Perhaps the most important chapter in this book is by Roger Flood and Charlie Hollister. And they wrote a chapter on contourites. This is important because this is quite different than turbidites. What they did was, this is the diagram from that chapter. This is North America. The contour currents are moving parallel to the bathymetric contours. And they were depositing these sediments, which they are called contourites. This is at right angle to the mass transport coming from the same North American continental margin. So this is, we are looking at 2 completely different downslope processes versus the along slope processes. The next big book was 1977. This is the APG Memoir 26, and it's called Seismic Stratigraphy. Oil companies at the time thought this is the Bible of petroleum companies. And in that, there is a chapter called Global Changes of Sea Level. This is published by Vail, Mitchum, Thompson. I highlighted Mitchum because he was the first one to recognize and publish the seismic signatures of submarine fans. Then the next book, edited by Bama, Narmak, and Barnes, came out in 1985. And the Bama worked for Gulf, and at the same year, it was observed by Chevron. And it is a product of what's the conference called COMFAN, Committee on Fan. There are 48 chapters, 3 of them by mobile people, Dammit and Flood. This is the same Roger Flood I talked about earlier, about contorites. They were all working at Columbia at the time. The other 2 papers are by me and Mayola, me, Dammit, and Mayola. This one is on the submarine fan criticizing Moody model. This is on sea level changes. These are the other companies that contributed to this book. One of the important contributions of that book is to compare modern fans with ancient fans. For example, the world's largest fan, called Bengal fan, it goes from here to here. And Moody studied HO fan in Spain. When you plot the same fan to the same scale, that's the size of the fan. So if you take that and plot here, Moody's ancient fan is a little dot. So when Moody says inner fan, middle fan, and outer fan, it doesn't make any sense in terms of modern systems. So what that means to the principle of uniformitarianism. So it created a lot of questions. That's why this book is very important to understand deep water systems. Because of that, we published a paper in Geology in '85. The title of that paper is the Turbidite facies scheme proposed by Moody is valid for interpreting ancient submarine fans? The answer is no. At the same time, Dammit was published this image on the cover of the APG bulletin, and it, as you can see, it shows nice meandering channel pattern, except this channel pattern occurs 3,000–4,000 meters water depth on the seafloor. So what that means, when you look at a meandering channel in Alaska, that shows pretty much the same thing. This is on the land, this is underwater. Does it mean the same process operated underwater? These are the questions this publication raised. And that showed how complicated the deep water sedimentation is. Then the next book is on seismic facies. This was edited by Paul Weimer and Marty Link. Both were working for Mobil at the time. By the time the book came out, Paul Weimer went to University of Colorado. These are the people that contributed to this. There are 3 chapters. People contributed were Armantrout, Beeman, Dammit, Braithwaite, Link, Steve Malachek. These are the people who contributed. And at the same time, Henry Possamentier was working for ARCO here in Dallas. He, with some other people in Exxon, they published a paper on the seismic attributes of submarine fans. In 1992, Moody published a book on turbidite sandstone. This is a collection of some spectacular photographs Moody took all over the world. But you can't buy this book because it is not sold to public places. You can only get it from Muti or from Agent. It is an Italian oil company that published it. Muti sent to people who worked on turbidites all over the world. I was fortunate enough to get 2 copies, although I was criticizing the models. The other book was edited by Weimer, Baumann, and Perkins. Came out in '94. This has got 3 chapters by mobile people, one by Alan Keane, offshore Nigeria, John Wagner on the camera in Gulf of Mexico, and myself on the Washita Flesh. These are the other companies that contributed to this volume. This is essentially a case study, a large collection of case studies. Perhaps the most influential paper on fans is by Vail and others. They said if you just have seismic profiles, you can put them into sequence stratigraphic framework, and if you see this kind of mounded geometry in that framework, you call that basin flow fan, and they would look like a blocky motive in gamma ray logs, and they would look like this in the model, but they would be composed of sandy turbidites. So this is a hypothetical model. Nobody verified whether the model worked or not. So we at Mobile thought it's a good time to go and look at examples, select cases where the seismic shows those mounded character, and select examples where we have core and see what the core shows. So we selected this Faro Basin west of Shetland, and this is how the seismic look like. It's a nice mounded geometry, and this is where the core comes from. So if the model is correct, we should be able to see sandy turbidites. This is how the core looks like. Large slump flow. There are no turbidites. More importantly, it's a mudstone, not sandstone. Another example is highly contorted silt and mud, sand injection. So it has got all kind of complicated sedimentary features, but the turbidites are nowhere to be found. At the same time, oil companies in England, they were drilling mounds in the North Sea, and they were coming up with mudstone. This got the attention of the UK government. They have UK Department of Trade and Industry called DTI. The head of the DTI is one John Brooks at the time. He wanted to know what happens here. So he asked Mobile to come and present their results. So I went to London, made the presentation. The first thing he said was, we should communicate this message to all the oil companies in Europe. So DTI organized 2 workshops. We brought the seismic, we brought the core. We simply asked them to look at what's going on in the core. The people would not believe that the cores are so different than the model predicted. Perhaps the most controversial paper we wrote from Mobile was this one, looking at rocks in the Washita Flesh. This one is based on a lot of work. We started this project in '83, we completed it in '95. This covers Oklahoma, Arkansas. This is how the rocks look like. It's called Washita Flesh Jackford Formation. We measured 794 beds individually. These are the people who helped. We published in the AAPG. We said this is all sandy debris and bottom column reworking. There are no turbidites to be found. The reason it is important, the Washita Flesh is considered as the classic North American example of a turbidite and fan. This is how the close-up looked like. They're all sigmoidal deformation. They are not turbidites. So we published this model in the AAPG bulletin. That was the original model fan. This is the revised model, mass flow, isolated bunches of rocks sitting there. And when we published it, all hell broke loose because people have been running field trips and saying these are turbidites. There were 5 discussions. It occupied 42 printed pages, the AAPG bulletin. They were written by some other classic people in the group called Bama, very well-known people, Bama, Lowe, Weimer, Slack, and people like that. And AAPG published discussion, only 1 or 2 pages, and there is a controversy. And the managing editor told me that this is the longest discussion published in their history since it was founded in 1917. We also got a discussion on the basin floor fan paper. Again, if you look at the names, Hitchcock, Pickering, Barma, and Neller, Postman, these are all some of the top people in this field. And we simply wrote in our reply, look, we looked at the rocks do not supply a turbidite interpretation. Simple. So all these discussions were based mainly on emotions. The last project I worked on when I retired from Mobile was this compilation of quantitative data on deep water systems. It was published in 1998. Like Muti book, we distributed as a complimentary copy to select people all over the world. And after I retired, I published these 2 books. These were published as part of the Elsevier Handbook of Petroleum Exploration and Production. I summarized all the work I did. And more recently, I wrote a paper on submarine fans. And the conclusions are, there are 29 submarine fan models, if you follow all the publications, and 21 triggers of sediment failures. The turbidite facies models are obsolete. That is the Barma sequence and other sequence. They don't mean anything. Mass transport deposits are important. Bottom current rework sands are important. Sand distribution varies with process. After it's published, Elsevier published their Scopus citation index data recently. According to that citation index, this paper is the most cited article during the last 3 years. It's ranked number 1. So people are paying attention to these controversial ideas. That is the review of turbidites and fans. Now I'm going to go into the actual talk I'm supposed to talk tonight. This is the actual talk, actual title.